It was a hectic period of training and I only averaged 4 hours of sleep each night. I thought I could catch up on sleep during the travel to the alien ship. No such luck. Training continued non-stop until the day before we reached the ship. Then Commander Douglas gave us the day off. He wanted us rested for the next part of the mission. The guy was all heart. Actually, he was pretty tight-lipped. He was calm and cool, all business. Nothing seemed to rattle him, not even Dr. Becker's irritating manner. I was beginning to wonder if the commander had any emotions at all. Commander Douglas would be remaining inside the shuttle the whole mission. It was his job to make sure we made it safely to the alien ship and that we had a way home whether we survived or not. I was beginning to envy him and thought about volunteering to be co-pilot. The more time I had to think about making contact with an alien species, the more things I could see going wrong. After a solid 12 hours of sleep, I awoke feeling surprisingly fresh and went in search of bagged nutrition and drink and also someone to talk to. Fortunately, I found Dr. Carter and Dr. Tanakai. Dr. Becker was still sleeping, and so were the Marines. "Anybody know what time it is?" I asked as I floated in.
"Earth time or mission time?"
asked Dr. Tanakai. "What time is it in Austin, Texas? I've heard of enough of that T-minus 20 hours stuff," I said.
"It's 2:38 p.m. in Texas,"
said Dr. Carter, looking at her phone. "You brought your phone?" I asked.
"It has all my apps and functions as a world clock, too,"
she said with a smile.
"But I do miss the internet. If you're going to heat something up, I suggest the pot roast with mashed potatoes and green peas."
"I had that yesterday. The green peas were like little raisins but without flavor," I said, looking through the prepackaged food.
"You must have gotten a bad package. Mine were delicious,"
Dr. Carter replied, way too chipper.
"The turkey is very good,"
added Dr. Tanakai. I decided on the turkey dinner with M&Ms for dessert. "I wish we had cold beer on this trip." Dr. Tanakai smiled.
"I was just wondering how they got the space shuttle Atlantis ready so quickly. I thought it was decommissioned and headed for a static display in some museum."
"I was talking to the sergeant earlier. He kinda let it slip that it's not the Atlantis. That was a cover story. I got the feeling that the military was keeping a shuttle of its own under wraps, a secret ship that could be used for their own purposes, probably in case of space warfare, anti-satellite missions, or even acquisition of an enemy's satellite. They are probably now hiding the real Atlantis and using it to support the cover story,"
Dr. Carter shared. "A ship built to CIA or military specs?" "Yeah, that makes sense," I said. Dr. Straunton said the Chinese had assembled the main liquid fuel tank to provide extra propulsion on this trip. They had probably stolen all our plans to build their own anyway. And the solid rocket boosters were just larger versions of the old ones. They are made from stacking disks of fuel.
"Makes you wonder what else they didn't tell us, doesn't it?"
"You can never trust the government completely,"
added Dr. Tanakai, looking back over his shoulder.
"I think we should keep an eye on our Marine friends."
Commander Douglas came over the intercom then.
"We will be docking shortly. Wake up the rest of the crew, get them fed and ready."
Short and sweet. That was the commander. The approach to the alien ship was uneventful. The ship was secured with magnetic grapples that could have lifted the shuttle in Earth gravity. As far as we could tell, the aliens had completely ignored us. It was good news, but a little creepy too. We went over our mission plans again and wished each other luck. We were each outfitted with a jetpack so we could essentially just fly over the surface of the huge alien ship. Our boots had magnetic soles that could be activated when we wanted to walk along the hull or inside the ship. I had noticed there were no rocket nozzles on the outside of the alien ship. That had been a topic of conversation during our mission preparations. Evidently, the aliens used a type of propulsion different from anything we knew. We reached the command module of the alien ship more quickly than I thought possible. We were all very quiet, lost in our own thoughts. It was incredible seeing the size of the ship and the moon far below with all its craters, nothing but grays and shadows. There's a lack of any color on the moon, and the alien ship's hull was a dark gray. There were large metal supports joining each of the cylinders together. Where they met the cylinders, the two pieces flowed together with no visible seam. The mining facility could be seen, with its huge plume of debris shooting into space. We had purposely chosen this side of the ship to land and travel so we would be sheltered from any moon dust or rubble that got into the moon's orbit. I was surprised that there was none. Then it occurred to me it wasn't a happy coincidence. The mining facility was throwing the debris clear of the moon's gravity on purpose, so it would not hit the alien ship or the steady train of buckets that were ascending from the surface. We had no pictures of the belly of the alien ship, and I was tempted to take a quick peek, but I stuck to the mission. Besides, I knew there was at least one large laser underneath tasked with protecting the ship from anything it deemed as interfering with its operation. We had hoped there would be a hatchway on the command module like the one our probe had disappeared into. And sure enough, there was. It looked identical. It was not overly large, just large enough for us in our suits to get into. Not enough room for the jetpacks, however. We removed our jetpacks and secured them to the hull with magnets. We also secured a small signal transponder to the hull, hoping it would be able to relay communications to the shuttle after we went inside. Then the sergeant placed a small electromagnet against the hatch. When he activated the magnet, the hatch immediately responded by receding in a few inches and then sliding to the side. The sergeant went in first, and we followed one at a time. I wondered if the hatch might close on me or one of the crew, chopping them in half, or at the very least trapping them there and blocking our exit. Fortunately, the hatch remained open and only closed several minutes after we were all inside and clear of the hatchway. The inside of the ship was unlike anything I had expected. There was no hallway of any kind. We were standing in a large space maybe 20 feet deep from the flat rear hull. The inside was cylindrical, mirroring the outside of the ship. At the end of the open space was machinery. It was huge and filled the inside of the ship. It was not densely packed, but had spaces between its different components. Supports reached across from different points of the machinery to the hull. It was going to be difficult crawling through all the machinery to the forward end of the ship. It was the forward end that was most likely to house the crew and the controls. "Any luck communicating with Commander Douglas on the shuttle?" I asked the sergeant.
No. There's no signal reaching the transponder on the outside of the hull. We'll be out of communication until we exit or figure out a way to prop the door open,"
Sergeant Clanton said, as if asking for a suggestion. "I don't think we should jack around with the hatch until we know if there's another way out. I would hate to get it jammed half open, half shut," I said.
"Agreed,"
the sergeant responded.
"It's a machine. The whole thing is a machine. I knew it. It's just like the probe, unmanned,"
said Dr. Becker as we spread out, looking into the maze of mechanical parts. "We still don't know that for sure. We have to reach the other end first," I said, but it did look like he might be right.
"There are no hallways, no displays, no place that an organism can interface with the machinery. I am telling you, this is a machine. One huge machine."
Dr. Becker seemed quite convinced and pleased with himself.
Over here.
Dr. Carter called out. We looked up to our 2 o'clock position on the inside of the hull. Dr. Carter had walked up the side of the hull and was peering into the machinery.
It looks like enough space to get through for quite a ways. There are a few obstacles, but not bad.
"We should be looking for a power source, a way to pull the plug while we are traveling to the front,"
Dr. Becker suggested. No one responded to him. I thought about telling him that the aliens, if they were present, might be monitoring our transmissions, but the chances seemed pretty small. Then the sergeant spoke up.
"Dr. Becker, I would advise you to restrain yourself from making any more remarks concerning any deleterious actions against our host. We're on an open channel, and our communications could be misinterpreted, even by machines,"
the sergeant said, giving Becker a no-nonsense look.
"We're on a peaceful mission."
We had to crawl over and under machinery. Worse, there were many places where the machinery had sharp projections that could tear our suits, and there was no atmosphere inside this part of the ship. We had to help each other, keeping an eye on any possible damage to our suits. It was taking far too much time. At our current rate, we would be halfway through our oxygen before we made it to the forward section of the ship. The sergeant was leading the way when he gave us the good news.
"There seems to be an opening along the hull here. I can see to the forward section of the ship."
I managed to crawl up beside him, and sure enough, there was a small space, just enough for a person to stand up in. It was clear all the way forward. As I was looking forward, the sergeant laid against the hull. "What are you doing?" I asked.
"We don't have much time left. I am going to try pushing off and gliding all the way to the front. If I start to get out of control or drifting into the overhead machinery, I will engage my magnets on my boots. They will act like brakes and secure me to the hull,
he said. Sounds risky. There are a lot of sharp edges along the way. You have plenty of clearance if you travel in a straight line. But if you bump the hull and bounce into the machinery, or if you just drift too far from the hull, you could be in trouble, I said.
That's why I'm going first,
the sergeant told me, and with no further conversation, he pushed off with his legs and went flying forward. He made it look easy. He flew all the way to the forward bulkhead and caught himself easily, then engaged his boots and stood there waiting for us. Dr. Becker, you go next, I said. But you see that one piece of machinery that projects down into the space. It's the only real place where we might get caught up. Use your magnetic boots to stop under it, and then position yourself on top of it so you can catch anyone that drifts into it.
Bullshit. What if I get electrocuted touching that thing? It looks like a capacitor anyway. You go,
he said. Damn the man. But he did have a point. I hadn't thought of electrocution. There had been flashes of light like sparks within the machinery, but we had never been where we could see them or what they were coming from. Okay, I'll go. Dr. Carter, you come next, then you, Dr. Tanakai. Dr. Becker will bring up the rear.
Keep your eye focused on my left knee. Don't look around. Stay focused. That way you will move straight,
Sergeant Clanton instructed us. I looked at the distance, focused on the sergeant, and pushed off. It was like being Superman without the cape. When the low-hanging projection of machinery passed out of my vision, I engaged my boots and came to a screeching halt. I could feel the boots scrape against the hull, trying to lock onto it, and then I came to an abrupt, jarring stop. I thought my helmet would come off for a second. I stood and looked up. I had only passed the piece of machinery by a few yards. I walked back and reached out to grasp the machinery. Just as I touched it, a brilliant blue spark jumped and light flashed all around me. My heart skipped a beat before I realized I was all right. It had just been another electrical discharge somewhere within the massive machine. It had been close by, but it was just a coincidence that it had happened as I touched the object. I suddenly realized I was holding my breath. I took a minute and then climbed up onto the machinery and reoriented myself so I could push anyone away from it if they happened to drift too close. Okay, come ahead, Dr. Carter. I could swear they were all smiling and laughing at me, but they were too far away for me to see inside their helmets, and I heard nothing over the communications channel. All three passed by without incident, and I guess I was just being too cautious. I climbed down and started to push off towards the forward bulk when something caught my eye. It looked like a faint seam or a different type of metal on one part of the hull. I stepped onto it with my magnetic boot and nearly lost my balance. It rose and slid aside. It was another hatchway. This one was bigger, at least twice the size of the last one. I stepped off, and after a moment it closed again.
Looks like you found our way back, Hauptmann,
the sergeant said, giving me a little pat on the back. It was harder to push along the hull and get going because I didn't have a good backstop to jump off from like before. But I managed, and soon I was standing next to the others. There was obvious disappointment on everyone's face. I didn't know what to expect at this end, but this was not it. It was just like the other end. About 20 feet of open space between the machinery and the flat bulkhead, but the bulkhead had no hatch. No markings, no symbols, no seams, just a smooth circular surface that we walked all over, examining every inch. Dr. Carter even tried knocking. It was just a whim, but we all held our breath in silly expectation that something would happen, and when she knocked again, it was the old shave and a haircut, 2 bits, knock. That got a laugh out of most of us and broke the tension.
There's no hatch here,
Dr. Tanakai announced.
This space we are in is the mechanical room. It is much smaller than the total volume of the ship.
The rest of the ship below us is probably just cargo hold,
Dr. Becker speculated. We don't have much air left, said the sergeant.
We can continue here for a while longer, or we can try access from outside.
I don't see any sense in wasting more time in here, I said.
I agree,
said Dr. Tanakai.
We should spend our remaining time examining the outside of this area. We can go through the hatchway Dr. Hauptmann found.
The others nodded in agreement except for Dr. Becker. We went back down to the hatchway and exited the vessel. It was a short magnetic walk to the front of the ship. The front was rounded slightly, not like an airplane nose, but definitely rounder. There was something between the outer nose and the inner flat bulkhead, but what? After examining every inch of the rounded surface, we still did not have a clue. The sergeant announced when our time was over, and we had to return to the space shuttle. It was a long walk back to the jetpacks and a very quiet ride back to the shuttle.